Hello, I'm Michael Parker, and welcome to Antidote. In the wake of the New Hampshire primaries, it has really emerged a story of three people: Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton. Today we're going to talk about why we as voters like or dislike these people, and some of the answers may surprise you. They may be far more elemental than you expected. Joining us to discuss this is Dr. Melvyn Lurie. He is a Harvard psychiatrist and the author of Sex in Politics. Dr. Lurie, welcome to Antidote.
Glad to be here, Michael.
Thank you for joining us today. First of all, before we get into this and kind of apprising each of the candidates and what you think their appeal or non-appeal is, what, first of all, is sex in politics? What's the framework of that?
Sex in politics is a biological view or biological perspective on our society and on politics in particular. If you think of the basics of life, to survive and to reproduce, the reproduction being important because otherwise we die, in humans, survival and reproduction is carried out in its characteristic way. Reproduction is carried out in the nest, which you could call the tent or the home, the apartment, the house. And survival is usually focused on by the male, who is both inside and outside the nest. His role is to acquire resources for the survival of his mate, who is in the nest, with their offspring and their offspring. His other role in survival is to protect the nest against intruders. The female's role is to feed the newborn, and she is bound to the nest because only she can do this anatomically in terms of her breasts, and anatomically in terms of her brain, which is wired differently from that of males. So with that as a backdrop, we can see how this paradigm is played out in society and in politics in particular, and it has become part of the difference between the two parties over the last, perhaps, generation. And that also gives us some insights into what's going on with Western civilization. But we can focus on politics for now, if you like.
All right, well, we are going to return to that. And one of the things that you mentioned is how the two parties, one represents the dad, one represents the mom. And I'm sure people can guess what that is, but we're going to come back to that in a minute. The first thing I want to start out with, though, is this past week was a really bad week for Hillary Clinton. There were statements made not by her, but by Madeleine Albright and by Gloria Steinem, both older women, that were on their face quite insulting to some younger women and insulting to a lot of people. I guess the question that I have, because you make the point that to win elections, you have to understand sex. And the Clinton campaign, all of these people are smart enough to know those are fundamental issues. So how did they fumble the ball so bad? Because this message did not resonate. She did not get a younger vote. Many young women voted for Bernie, and Bernie did very, very well in the election last night. She did not.
Okay, well, here's what's going on. It's more or less paradoxical because so much sex has been involved in the Clinton family in their public life. Their private life has been merged with it. But basically, Hillary Clinton's primary drop throughout her adult life has been the step in which the children inside the nest become independent enough for women to leave the nest and join the man in survival behavior, especially the survival behavior of acquiring resources for the nest and the family. So in years past, women would leave the nest when their children were old enough or when they would have some family care for the children, and perhaps join the man on the farm, but not engage in the more brawn-oriented functions. However, in our current environment, brawn is less important, brain is more important, and women are able to function equally with men. Now, there's a lot of overlap between men and women, so I'm talking about generalities here, and I'm talking about, if you will, the average. I'm also going to be talking about what's going on unconsciously. That's the problem with Hillary. She doesn't get the total picture. In any case, Albright and Steinem were also leaders in this movement to have women be equal as they left the nest and joined the process of survival, which is to acquire resources for the nest. Money, basically money. So Clinton didn't get that that's not the only issue people live by, and that's superficial and easy for everybody to understand, but she is so focused on it that she can't get onto anything else. In fact, she has suffered from the curse of the front runner, as did, of course, Jeb Bush in the beginning of this primary season. The curse of the front runner is that when you are the front runner and you say things, or if you take positions, all you can do is lose because you've got everybody. You're the front runner. Meanwhile, everyone else who's the back runner starts to come out with various positions, and one or another of them will catch on and then start to challenge the front runner, who's really unprepared to deal with it because the front runner has based the campaign on maybe one or two issues and is not willing to get into the other issues for fear of losing the support they had. After a while, of course, they lose it. Gradually, it becomes eroded, and that's what's happened with Hillary Clinton. The Madeleine Albright and Gloria Steinem statements appear to have backfired because, first of all, the modern woman doesn't want to see herself only as a woman. She wants to see herself in a broader sense, and she is fine with her reproductive self as well as her survival self. So what Steinem and Albright were doing were, at the same time they were supporting certain functions of women, they were demeaning other functions of women. And I think that was a turnoff. There's another issue. There's another issue that was going on. And that's that, this doesn't have to do with sex and politics, but it was going on. And that's that the State Department basically said there are 22 emails that are, that they're so sensitive they can't be released. And this was released, I think, 2 days before the Iowa primary. So that set the stage. That set the stage for what followed.
I understand. You mentioned something interesting. You said that there was something unconscious going on as well. I think I may know where you're going with that, but explain that a little bit further.
Sure. So our unconscious minds, that's the part of our mind that we're unaware of, but it has relevance in terms of what we do, what decisions we make, etc. So Clinton doesn't see the big picture of what is going on, and she only focuses on one aspect of the female's role in society. In the unconscious are early memories, things that happened to us when we were 2, 3, 4 years old, before we can even remember what was going on. But also, they are the fundamentals of life. They have to do with the pleasure that drives survival function, especially in men, and reproductive function, especially in women. And again, Hillary is focusing on a secondary role of women. The primary role of women is reproduction. That's what gives them pleasure. That's what gives them pain if they cannot carry it out. The emerging from the nest to join the male in survival function is really a secondary one for women. It's a necessary one. It's really a rational one. There's less emotion involved in acquiring resources and making money for women than for men. Men more or less have to do it or their self-esteem diminishes. Women do it for rational reasons. They want to support their family, but they won't overdo it usually. They'll keep a balance between their family and their work life. Clinton is only focused on women as workers, and women are much more than that.
And she has always been focused on that. I mean, even dating back to her valedictorian speech at Wesleyan College way back when. But one of the other things about Hillary Clinton that I think that, unfortunately, her team undervalues is, you know what, straight up some of her just real unlikabilityness. And there is a perception that she is untrustworthy. And I've heard that echoed by young women in the press even over the last 2 days. It's weird. I asked my 13-year-old daughter last night while I was watching the campaign results, I said, who would you vote for? She goes, oh, I'm feeling the burn. I'm like, really? I said, you would vote for Bernie over Hillary? She goes, oh yeah. She goes, we laugh at Hillary. She's trying too hard to be hip. She makes us uncomfortable.
That's right. She is trying to be hip. She's not hip.
All right, well, let's move on. And I mean, the truth of the matter, I think that she still could get the nomination because yesterday she's walking out of this thing with like 8 superdelegates and like 15 delegates, not that many different delegate count than what Bernie's going to get, which I think is a shame. So I think this portion of the election is going to go on for a long time. But let's turn to Bernie Sanders. Talk about the appeal of Bernie Sanders.
Okay, well, Bernie Sanders, of course, unconsciously, it's not as if he knows this paradigm or so. Unconsciously, he is eliciting lots of pleasure in the young voters, those who are still somewhat dependent on others, are not independent functioning adults yet. And he is eliciting a lot of pleasure in them by giving to them. So what does he give to them? Well, he talks about free education, and he talks about forgiving their debt. That's the thing that they find overwhelming. After they're in the workforce for a few years, they'll be able to carry the debt. But right now, it's really overwhelming for the youth. And these are the issues that he touches that alleviates the anxiety that the youth have about their debt, for example, or about education, and touches their pleasure. At the same time, he is acting like the female within the nest values. I didn't use that terminology yet, so I'll start it now. So in the nest, the dependent children are nurtured, they're given to, and they are prepared for life in the real world outside the nest, and then eventually their own nests. Well, part of preparation is education. And when he talks about educating the youth, that's something that resonates with women. In fact, it resonates more with the primary roles of women and not the secondary role so much, which is the secondary work is more work outside the nest, but primarily women have been genetically selected to be superfunctional inside the nest. They get pleasure when they're successful at it, when their kids are successful. They have pain when unsuccessful at what goes on in the nest, and they have anxiety when perhaps they'll be unsuccessful. And that anxiety keeps them working hard to nurture, to prepare, to support education, to take care of the sick, all the functions that go on in the home, in the nest. So Bernie is unconsciously, of course, he doesn't, I don't think, done this consciously. He's picked issues that give women and the youth a sense of pleasure and allays their anxiety. Hillary's really talking about a function that's relatively rational, not emotional, that is a woman's issue.
And many of the things that he is talking about, as you put in your work of in the nest or out of the nest, also resonate with what traditional values for the in the nest Democratic Party are.
That's right. Oh, absolutely. And he does it to the extreme, which is why he's called an extremist. And and because he touches these nerves, the emotions come out. And these emotions are pleasurable ones. He is inspiring. To be inspiring means to create emotions that lead to action. That's why all the Democrats, especially the youth, go to his rallies. That's why he's racking up a lot of votes and will continue to do so. You know, Hillary has a lot of the practical aspects of politics set up. She has ground game. She has an organization. These things are really crucial. I mean, there's no denying them. But she still doesn't get the fundamental issues of women, even though she's touting herself as a woman supporter.
I understand. Let's move on to Donald Trump. Let's talk about, of course, he is with the Republican Party, and there's a whole different set of issues and characteristics that you apply to that. Talk about his appeal.
Okay. So Trump is man. He is a male, and he engages in the survival functions that are male's biological role, biological job. He does it in an unabashed way. So he talks about making money, and he knows how to make money. He's proven he's valid in that regard, has credibility. And he talks about how stupid the current system is, because there are so many jobs that are overseas that he will bring back. That's the economic part of him. That's the part that has to do with acquiring resources.
The out of the nest.
That's right. That's one of the out of the nest functions. Women engage in it too, as I've said before, when the dependent children are less dependent and can tolerate the mothers being out of the nest for a while. But for men, it's their preoccupation. It's their biological job. The other element of the survival job of men is to protect the nest. Now, if you look at biology, there are creatures that lay eggs and bury the eggs, for example. But other animals will come by and steal them. Birds will build their nests at the top of trees, for example. So that's another way of protecting the contents of the nest, meaning the offspring. Well, for humans, we're right on the ground, etc., and we know where our nests are, their tents, their huts, their houses. But it's the job of the male to protect the nest, really his offspring, his mate and his offspring, against intruders. Also against the elements, but against intruders. So the male will fortify the nest by fixing up things around the house. The woman will make it comfortable by beautifying the house. These are all extensions of very fundamental biological roles. So Trump talks about keeping the country free of intruders. You see, as the human mind can generalize from the specific to the general or the abstract, the home can be the home country. And he is protecting it against intruders. Who are the intruders? The immigrants on the southern border, or the ISIS that might come in with the refugees. And he's constantly talking about that. Again, he's doing it intuitively. It feels good to him as a man to talk about these functions, to support these functions, and it feels really good to the men, or the male mentality that drives the Republican Party. So once again, he's for jobs, the economy, money. And on the other hand, he's for protecting the total nest, the country, against intruders.
So to reiterate, the Democratic Party inside the nest, Republican Party outside the nest, that all makes sense. And you've gone so far as to say that the Republican and Democratic parties are like a dysfunctional family in which dad is the Republican and mom is the Democrat.
Well, I don't know how dysfunctional it is. The government and the society is getting a bit dysfunctional because it doesn't understand what's going on. Really, to be functional, there has to be a balance between survival and reproductive functions. And in order for there to be a balance, there has to be an understanding of what the issues are, an understanding at the conscious level, not the unconscious level. So really, and actually Donald Trump does this as well, intuitively again, every time he talks about supporting something that costs money, he talks about the cost of it. We'll build a wall, and the Mexicans will pay for it. This is the balance between the male role and the female role. You can't expend resources and expect to continue to build things and have policies that cost a lot of money. This gets into the issue of the civilization cycle. I don't know if you want to go that far, but basically, here's another way of looking at the survival function of resources. So the male, in order to get resources for the nest, resources such as food, clothing, gets money, because money can be converted into food, clothing, and other necessary resources. But who does the converting? The female. She gets the money from the male. In animals, she'll get the resources directly, but in humans, she'll get the money. But then she has to convert the money into necessary resources, food and other resources for the nest, for the children. Well, how does she do it? She shops and she spends. And that is her biological role. It is her biological role to shop wisely and spend wisely. Well, the men, on the other hand, / Republicans, get a little nervous when there's too much spending because they might not be able to keep up with it. So they are anxious that they can't fulfill their survival role outside the nest of acquiring resources. Sure, they can acquire them, but if they're spent quicker than they can acquire them, that's a problem. So basically, in a functional family, the man and the woman are working together for the sake of their family and their offspring. They support the acquiring function, and they don't go overboard in the spending function in relation to what can be acquired. Our government now doesn't do that. They spend, and it drives the Republicans nuts. And there seems like there's no tomorrow, which really makes the Republicans very nervous. It's a sense of pressure.
Well, let's continue on the thread with the Republicans, because recently Rand Paul dropped out, and you mentioned that Rand Paul, one of the reasons that he does not fit well for success within the Republican Party at this level is that he, in some ways, rejects this protectionism type of idea. He's a non-interventionist, and listen, I liked Ron Paul, his father, a great deal, but you're saying that a person like Rand Paul is not a good fit within this type of Republican male mentality.
That's right, because the Republicans want to hear someone who is interested in protecting the nest, because that's what fundamentally they want to do. That's their biological job. So the way the nest is protected traditionally is with military strength, for example. Now, you can protect the nest in other ways. You can be crafty about it. You can have a moat around it. You can deplete the resources of the enemy. These are the kinds of things that Paul will talk about. But basically, he's not clearly talking about protecting the nest against intruders. That has traditionally been solved with military strength, and he doesn't talk about it in those terms. So he doesn't resonate, or he doesn't give pleasure to the issues, the unconscious issues, outside the nest issues of the Republicans.
Well, one other thing I want to say before we move on is that with people talk about Trump speaking with very simple words, and he repeats certain things over and over. He talks a lot about winning, and I think that that speaks partially to an optimism that many Americans wish to rekindle, which seems to have gone out the window quite some time ago. So, yes, he's appealing to male ideas of achieving and accomplishing, which are Republican ideas, but I think also there's some optimism within those particular words that is inferred.
Absolutely, and the more he talks about achieving this, that is success in the male role of being the victor, the more he gains pleasure, vicarious pleasure. He stimulates vicarious pleasure in people who share that value. So he keeps doing it. Again, he doesn't know the details of this, but he knows that when he talks about this, people will applaud or otherwise show their approval. What he's doing, he's addressing the fundamental desire of males in general to be victorious. There's some more details about this I could get into, but I think it would take too long to be off the subject.
Well, one other thing about both Sanders and Trump is that I believe that they believe what they are saying.
Absolutely, and that's another reason it comes through so strongly. I mean, Hillary often seems to be reading from a speech. I mean, there's no speech in front of her, but it's as if things are memorized. Whereas when you communicate what you really feel, the other person feels it too. Emotions are contagious. So other people will feel the emotions that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are experiencing themselves and that are sending out. It comes through unconsciously in the way they're perceived.
I love it, and I love the fact that it's got the establishment completely freaked out, because really they don't want either one of these guys to win. And now we're talking about this possibility of brokered conventions on both sides, which I really don't like that idea. And it's like tilting the table to keep these guys out of the winner's circle. But it remains to be seen how that will turn out. Let's turn our attention last to our current president, Obama, because you've had some very interesting words about Obama. And one of the things, even though within the political parties, we talk about the Republican side being the dad side, you say that we look at Obama as dad in some ways.
Well, we look at our leaders as parents.
Yes.
But Obama does advocate in the nest issues. He first of all, spending is not a particular concern of his. This is the bone that the Republicans always pick with him. And that's part of the female role she spends. She's not as concerned about acquiring. She's concerned, but she's not as concerned as the male is, because it's not, her biological role is more to spend than to acquire. So Obama supports education, as Bernie Sanders is now. Obama does not support war in the traditional sense. He might talk about protecting the nation by cyber sabotage of ISIS or others, but there's very little physical protection involved. He's cut back the military budget, and he's expanded the other in the nest function of giving or providing for the dependents. In the nest, that's appropriate. The dependents there are children. They cannot provide for themselves. They are not adapted as adults to the environment. But by the same token, the Democrats, and Obama's a good example, they expand this to the dependent people who are adults of society, and they're constantly giving to them. They feel pain. The Obama people and the Bernie Sanders people and the Hillary Clinton people, I believe, truly feel pain that the solution to health care isn't being adopted. Their solution, they see the solution as insurance. Well, I'm a doctor, and I know that insurance is really only part of the solution. But the point is, they're addressing the issue of taking care of the sick. Where do you go when you're injured or ill? You go home. And who takes care of you there? The female. She functions inside the nest. Taking care of the ill is primarily a female issue and an in-the-nest issue. And Obama supports that. That was his initial legislative maneuver, the Obamacare. And so all the elements seem to add up, don't they? On the one hand, the Democrat, Obama, and Bernie Sanders support the dependent, the person who can't make it on their own. Of course, it's not just the children in the nest, it's those outside the nest who can't. They are not interested in protecting the nest, at least not in the traditional way, with a strong military. They are fine with spending. They're fine, also, the Republicans would say they're fine telling people what to do. Big government. This is another issue that the outside the nest people have, big government. Well, inside the nest, mother tells the children what to do all the time. That's part of the mother's role. Mother should get pleasure out of telling the children what to do, especially if it works out. But that's what the mother can't resist doing because it's part of her biological job. The same with Obama, the same with the Democrats, at least from the Republican standpoint, is that the Democrats are very comfortable telling people what to do with their money, what to do with their health care, etc. And the Republicans are identified with the outside the nest functions where people have to be relatively autonomous, and they don't go around telling other adults what to do. They have to function on their own as adults, so they don't like a government that tells them what to do. The list goes on and on.
I get it. It makes sense to me. My last question, I guess, going forward is, do you have a prediction on who's going to win?
Well, I really think Trump will win the Republican nomination. I think it because not only does he have this air game where he touches people emotionally, but he's rich enough and smart enough to be able to develop enough of a ground game to win. Also, he's fortunate in that he has 3 or 4 rivals that can't that fight each other, and they take votes away from each other. On the Democratic side, I think Sanders will win. I will because I don't think Hillary really gets what's going on, and this whole thing is going beyond her. Now you talk about who's going to win the general election. To a large extent, this has to do with events. So if events, as the election approaches, are threats to the economy, significant threats to the economy, or threats to the country in terms of some terrorist actions, then Trump has the upper hand because people will want to support the person that they feel is focused on survival. On the other hand, if things are fine, if the stock market turns upward, if the recession talk dwindles, then Bernie has the upper hand because people can engage in inside the nest activities. There's enough money to spend on education. There's not really, but it feels like there's a freedom from focusing on survival. So that in that sense, Bernie Sanders would have the upper hand. So I don't mean to beg the question, but I can't predict the events. You know, when it comes to midterm elections, the president can control events to a large extent. Mm-hmm. George Bush did that. Yep. Many other presidents have done it. They'll start talking about potential dangers to the country, and they'll release data that might or might not be, you know, characteristic of the full data picture. But now we're talking about two non-incumbents. So unless Obama gets in there and tries to control events, events will just occur, and the election, I think, will turn on that.
Well, Dr. Lurie, I appreciate you coming on today, because many of the ideas that you express are things that make sense to me, and I identify politically as an independent. So I actually like both Trump and Sanders for different reasons. And one of the things that always puzzles me is how people can be so adamant about choosing one side or the other. But I guess that's just human nature, because I can see things that I like on both sides of the aisle and in people, and I don't know. So I'm just trying to figure out why people want to do what they want to do. But I appreciate you spending time with us today, Dr. Lurie. We're going to guide people to your website and to the book in the links below. And thank you so much for appearing.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, who are you going to vote for? What things matter to you? Are you concerned with a platform, or is it really just about who you like or who you dislike? I admit on my behalf, I have often voted for people just so I didn't have to vote for the other guy. And I know that I'm not alone in that position. This particular election, if it plays out the way that it looks like it could, I love it. I would love to see Trump, Sanders, two outsiders with great populist support. I do not want to see this go to some kind of brokered convention where we get, you know, Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton or whatever the dynastic clans decide to put before us because of some crazy delegation that we've slipped. I don't want to see that. I want to see the people get what they want, whatever that is. And stay tuned. This has been Antidote. Until next week, you, me, every single one of us, we are the Antidote.